The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Centralia, Montana, in 1878, silencing the usual bustle of the frontier town as Declan Quinn's temper flared like wildfire. His weathered hand hovered over his Colt revolver, eyes narrowed at the saloon owner who dared challenge him. It wasn't the first time his infamous temper had emptied a street, but it would be the first time someone didn't cower before him. "I ain't paying double for watered-down whiskey, Sanders," Declan growled, his voice carrying the rough edge of a man who'd spent years driving cattle across unforgiving terrain. At 32, his reputation as the fastest draw in 3 counties was matched only by his reputation for a hair-trigger temper. "My establishment, my prices," Sanders retorted, though the quiver in his voice betrayed his fear. Declan's fingers twitched, ready to teach the man a lesson, when movement caught his eye. A woman one he'd never seen before stood watching from the boardwalk. Unlike the other townspeople who scattered at the first sign of trouble, she remained, observing him with unnerving steadiness. Her simple blue dress suggested practicality, not prosperity, but something in her calm demeanor made him hesitate. The moment stretched, tense as a drawn bowstring, until Declan finally spat in the dirt. "Keep your rot gut," he muttered, turning away from Sanders. The crowd collectively exhaled as he stalked toward his horse. The woman still hadn't moved, her eyes following his every step. As he drew closer, he noticed they were an unusual shade of amber, striking against her dark hair. She didn't flinch when he approached, despite his imposing 6'2" frame and the dangerous energy radiating from him. "Enjoying the show, madam?" he asked, his voice deliberately harsh. She studied him for a long moment, then turned and walked away without a single word, leaving Declan Quinn, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, completely disarmed. Olivia Ellison had arrived in Centralia just 3 days prior, carrying little more than a trunk of belongings and a determination to start anew. At 26, she'd buried both parents, sold their failing farm in Minnesota, and decided the Montana Territory offered the fresh beginning she needed. The position as the town's new schoolteacher promised modest pay but respectability, something she valued above all else. Declan watched her retreating figure, inexplicably annoyed by her dismissal. Women typically either feared or fawned over him, they didn't simply walk away. Mounting his stallion, he rode toward his ranch, 5 miles outside town, the encounter nagging at him more than it should. The Double Q Ranch wasn't the largest in the territory, but it was prosperous enough, built by Declan's own hands after years of working as a hired gun. His past was littered with violence, but these days he mostly kept to himself, raising cattle with a small crew of ranch hands who knew better than to cross him. That evening, as he sat on his porch cleaning his gun by lamplight, his foreman, Bailey, approached cautiously. "Boss, you went to town today," Declan grunted in affirmation. "Hear you nearly put a bullet in old Sanders. Man's cheating his customers." Declan reassembled his weapon with practiced movements, watering down his whiskey and charging double. Bailey leaned against the porch railing. "Town's got a new schoolmarm. Pretty thing, from what Jenkins said." Declan's hands paused momentarily. "Saw her. Jenkins says she's taking over the schoolhouse. First time we've had a proper teacher since Mrs. Wilkins died last winter." Declan merely nodded, unwilling to admit the woman's silent appraisal had followed him home like a shadow. "Might be nice having educated young'uns around," Bailey continued. "My boy Tommy could use some learning." "Since when do you care about book learning?" Declan asked, holstering his cleaned weapon. "Since I figured out being smart with numbers might have kept me from being a ranch hand my whole life." Bailey shrugged. "Anyway, thought you should know the school's opening Monday next." After Bailey left, Declan remained on the porch, watching darkness settle over the Montana landscape. The woman's face appeared in his mind not beautiful in the conventional sense, but striking. There had been no fear in her eyes, only assessment. It unsettled him in ways gunfights never did. The next morning, Declan rode into town for supplies. He told himself it had nothing to do with curiosity about the new schoolteacher. Centralia was small but growing, situated at a crossroads where cattle drives often passed. The main street boasted a general store, 2 saloons, a small hotel, a bank, and the whitewashed church that doubled as a schoolhouse on weekdays. As luck would have it, Olivia was exiting the general store when he dismounted in front of it. She carried a stack of books, struggling slightly with their weight. Their eyes met, and Declan found himself moving forward to help before he'd made a conscious decision. "Allow me, madam." He reached for the books. She hesitated, then surrendered them with a nod. Still, she didn't speak. "I'm Declan Quinn. Own the Double Q Ranch outside town." He wasn't accustomed to introducing himself. Most everyone knew who he was, for better or worse. She regarded him with those remarkable amber eyes. "Olivia Ellison," she finally said, her voice softer than he'd expected, with a slight musical quality. "The new teacher. I know." He shifted the books in his arms. "Where to?" "The schoolhouse." They walked in silence, Declan acutely aware of the curious stares from townspeople. The notorious Declan Quinn, walking peacefully alongside the new schoolmarm. It would fuel gossip for days. At the schoolhouse, Olivia unlocked the door, revealing a dusty, neglected interior. She'd clearly begun cleaning, as one corner gleamed compared to the rest. "Not much of a welcome," Declan observed, setting the books on the teacher's desk. "It's a start." She surveyed the room with determination rather than dismay. "The children deserve better than this. How many students are you expecting?" 23, according to Mayor Hollister. "Ages 6 to 16. She began arranging the books on a shelf. Declan watched her efficient movements. "You're not from around here. Minnesota originally?" She continued working, not elaborating further. Her reticence intrigued him. Most people rambled nervously in his presence. "You always this talkative?" he asked, a hint of his usual edge returning. Olivia paused, turning to face him directly. "Mr. Quinn, I witnessed you nearly shoot a man yesterday over whiskey. Forgive me if I'm not immediately inclined toward friendly conversation." Her bluntness surprised a short laugh out of him. "Fair enough. Additionally," she continued, "I prefer to be judged by my actions rather than my words. In my experience, people who talk constantly rarely have much worth saying." Declan studied her, this woman who spoke so little but said so much when she did. "You got any help getting this place ready?" The mayor promised to send someone, but... She gestured at the dusty room. "I'll send my ranch hands tomorrow. They could use some honest work." Surprise flickered across her features. "That's very kind but unnecessary." "Not kind, practical. My foreman's got a boy who'll be in your school. Best he learns in a clean place." Declan moved toward the door. "They'll be here at sunup." He tipped his hat and left before she could refuse again, oddly satisfied with their exchange. She might be sparing with words, but there was steel beneath her quiet exterior. For the first time in years, Declan Quinn was genuinely curious about another person. True to his word, Declan sent 3 ranch hands to the schoolhouse the following morning. By midday, news had spread that Quinn's men were helping the schoolmarm, prompting other townspeople to join in. When Declan rode into town that afternoon, he found the schoolhouse transformed, windows gleaming, floors scrubbed, desks arranged in neat rows. Olivia stood on the porch, directing the placement of a new school bell donated by the blacksmith. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, a smudge of dust on her cheek. When she spotted Declan, something like gratitude softened her expression. "Your men work hard," she said as he approached. "They know what happens if they don't," he replied, then seeing her frown, added, "That was a joke." "Was it?" Her eyebrow arched skeptically. Before he could respond, a young boy ran up to them. "Miss Ellison, Pa says to tell you the bookshelves are finished." "Thank you, Tommy." She smiled at the boy. Bailey's son, Declan realized. "Tell your father I'm very grateful." The boy nodded, then looked up at Declan with undisguised awe. "Pa says you're the fastest gun in Montana, Mr. Quinn." "Tommy," Olivia chided gently. "It's all right," Declan said, looking down at the boy. "Your pa talks too much. Being fast with a gun isn't something to admire, boy. Being good with your mind, that's worth something. That's why you need to listen to Miss Ellison here." Tommy's eyes widened at this unexpected advice from the legendary gunslinger. "Yes, sir." As the boy scampered off, Olivia gave Declan a considering look. "That was unexpected." "I'm full of surprises," he said dryly. "Indeed." For the first time, a smile touched her lips, brief but genuine. "Thank you for the help, Mr. Quinn." "Declan," he corrected. "Mr. Quinn," she repeated firmly. "Professional boundaries are important in a small town." He inclined his head, respecting her stance even as he found himself wanting to break through it. "Will you be at the town social Saturday next?" The question surprised even him. "I haven't decided. Is it customary for the teacher to attend?" "Customary for everyone to attend. Only real entertainment we get around here." He shifted his weight. "Good way to meet the parents of your students." She considered this. "Then I suppose I should make an appearance." "Suppose you should." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Ellison." As he walked back to his horse, Declan realized he was looking forward to a town social for the first time in years. The realization was as unsettling as it was unexpected. The double queue kept Declan busy in the days that followed. A broken fence line meant predators had gotten to two calves, and a dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights threatened to escalate. By Saturday, his temper was simmering dangerously close to the surface. Bailey noticed his mood as they rode back to the ranch. "You still planning on going to the social tonight?" "Why wouldn't I?" Declan's tone was sharp. "No reason." Bailey wisely changed the subject. "You think Watson's going to cause more trouble over that creek? Let him try." Declan's hand instinctively moved to his gun. "That water's on my land." "Maybe talking to Sheriff Tate might help before things get out of hand." Declan snorted. "Tate's useless. Watson understands only one language. Boss, we don't need another situation like last year." Bailey's reference to the shooting that had left a cattle rustler dead hung in the air between them. Declan reined his horse to a stop. "You saying I was wrong to protect what's mine?" Bailey raised his hands placatingly. "No, sir. Just saying there might be other ways." They rode the rest of the way in tense silence. As they approached the ranch house, Declan's thoughts drifted to Olivia Ellison and her measured words. What would she think of his methods for handling disputes? The question bothered him more than it should. That evening, Declan spent more time than usual preparing for the social. He bathed, trimmed his beard, and put on his best shirt, dark blue, seldom worn. Bailey raised an eyebrow but wisely kept any comments to himself. The town hall was transformed for the social, lanterns casting a warm glow over tables laden with food brought by townspeople. A small band played in one corner, and children darted between adults. Declan's entrance caused the usual ripple of awareness, conversations momentarily pausing before resuming with forced casualness. He spotted Olivia immediately. She stood near the punch bowl, engaged in conversation with the mayor's wife. Her dress was simple but becoming a deep green that complemented her coloring. Her hair was arranged more elaborately than he'd seen before, with a few curls framing her face. Before he could approach her, Sheriff Tate intercepted him. "Evening, Quinn. Surprised to see you here." "Free country," Declan replied tersely. "Just hoping we won't have any trouble tonight." Tate's hand rested meaningfully on his badge. "That depends on whether anyone gives me reason for trouble." Declan's eyes remained on Olivia, who glanced in his direction before returning to her conversation. "I heard about your water dispute with Watson. I'm asking you to handle it legally, Quinn." Declan finally looked at the sheriff. "The law says that water's mine." "Then let the law uphold that. Don't take matters into your own hands, like you handled those rustlers last year." "By doing nothing until I handled it," Tate's face hardened. "That was different, was it?" Declan stepped closer. "Let me make this clear, I protect what's mine. If Watson crosses onto my land again, he'll regret it." "That sounds like a threat. Take it however you want." Declan moved past the sheriff, his good mood evaporating. He made his way to the refreshment table where Olivia now stood alone. "Miss Ellison." She turned, a cup of punch in her hand. "Mr. Quinn, good evening, you look." He hesitated, unused to paying compliments. "Nice." A faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you, you clean up well yourself. Don't sound so surprised." His tone was sharper than intended, her eyebrows rose slightly. "Is something wrong?" Declan glanced over at Sheriff Tate, who was still watching him. "Just the usual small-town politics." Olivia followed his gaze. "Ah, I see the sheriff doesn't share your approach to problem-solving. You don't know anything about my problems," he said defensively. "You're right." She set down her cup. "I don't, but I do know that anger rarely leads to wise decisions." Before Declan could respond, Tommy Bailey ran up to them. "Miss Ellison, Pa says to ask if you'll dance with him." Olivia looked past the boy to where Bailey stood, looking uncomfortable. "Tell your father I'd be delighted, Tommy." As she moved away, Declan felt unreasonably annoyed. He watched her dance with Bailey, then the blacksmith, then the banker. She moved gracefully, her reserved demeanor softening as she danced. Not once did she look in his direction. Later, as the band played a slower tune, Declan finally approached her. "May I have this dance, Miss Ellison?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose that would be appropriate." Her formal response irked him, but he took her hand anyway, leading her onto the dance floor. Her waist felt small beneath his hand, her movements perfectly in step with his. "You've danced with half the men in town," he observed. "I've danced with the fathers of my students, yes. Including my foreman." She looked up at him. "Mr. Bailey has been very helpful with the schoolhouse preparations." "And I haven't," Declan challenged. Olivia studied him for a moment. "Mr. Quinn, what exactly are you trying to say?" The direct question caught him off guard. "Nothing, just making conversation." "No, you're not. You're trying to provoke some reaction from me." Her voice remained calm, but her eyes were intent on his. "I've noticed you do that with everyone, push until they show fear or anger." Declan's jaw tightened. "You think you've got me figured out after a week in town? Not at all. I simply observe what's in front of me." The music ended and she stepped back. "Thank you for the dance." She walked away, leaving him standing alone on the dance floor. The encounter left him frustrated and oddly exposed. As if she'd seen something in him he'd rather keep hidden. The evening deteriorated further when Frank Watson arrived with his sons. The rival rancher made a point of loudly discussing the water dispute, glancing repeatedly in Declan's direction. "Man's just begging for trouble," Bailey muttered, appearing at Declan's side. "He'll find it if he keeps pushing," Declan replied, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. Bailey placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not here, boss. Too many women and children." Declan knew Bailey was right. but his pride demanded action. He strode toward Watson, ignoring Bailey's protest. "You got something to say to me, Watson. Say it to my face," Declan challenged, his voice cutting through the music and conversation. The room fell silent, people quickly moving back to create space between the two men. Watson, a bulky man in his 50s, turned slowly. "Just telling folks how you're trying to steal water that runs through my property. That creek starts on my land and you know it. After you adjusted the property line to suit yourself," Watson sneered. Declan's hand twitched toward his holster. "Careful, old man. I've killed men for less." "Is this really necessary?" Olivia's clear voice cut through the tension. She had stepped between them, her back to Declan as she faced Watson. "Miss Ellison, stay out of this," Declan warned. She didn't even glance back at him. "Mr. Watson, I believe your grandson Ethan will be in my class starting Monday." He mentioned how excited he was about learning to read properly. Watson blinked, momentarily thrown by the change of subject. Yes, madam. Boy's smart, takes after his grandmother. I look forward to teaching him." She smiled warmly. "Now, perhaps we could all remember that this is a social gathering. There are children present who shouldn't be exposed to adult disputes." Her quiet reprimand hung in the air. Watson, unwilling to appear unreasonable before the new teacher, grudgingly nodded. "Another time, Quinn," he muttered, before rejoining his family. Declan stood rigid with anger and frustration. Olivia finally turned to face him, her expression calm but firm. Without a word, she walked away, leaving him to absorb the fact that she had diffused a situation on the brink of violence without raising her voice or drawing a weapon. The realization was both humbling and infuriating. He left the social shortly after, riding back to his ranch with the moon lighting his way. Her words echoed in his mind. Anger rarely leads to wise decisions. The truth of it stung, especially as he recognized how close he'd come to creating a scene that would have terrified the very children she was trying to protect. Sunday morning found Declan in an uncharacteristically reflective mood. Rather than joining his men for the day's work, he saddled his horse and rode to the disputed creek. The water flowed clear and strong after recent rains, cutting through both properties. Standing at the boundary marker, Declan had to admit that Watson wasn't entirely wrong. The creek's path had shifted over the years, making the original property line ambiguous. It was a realization he might never have reached with his usual approach. Monday brought the first day of school. Declan had no reason to go into town, but found himself riding there anyway, arriving just as children were filing into the schoolhouse. He remained at a distance, watching as Olivia greeted each child by name at the door. Her smile was natural and warm, different from the reserved expression she typically wore around adults. Sheriff Tate approached on horseback. "Interesting spot for surveillance, Quinn." Declan tensed. "Free country." "Indeed it is." Tate followed his gaze to the schoolhouse. "She handled that situation at the social masterfully." "What's your point?" "No point, just an observation." Tate adjusted his hat. "I hear you were out at the creek yesterday." Declan's eyes narrowed. "You having me followed?" "Small town, people talk." Tate shrugged. "Watson mentioned you were measuring something." "Considering a compromise," Declan admitted reluctantly. "Shared access point upstream for both herds, separate watering schedules." Surprise registered on the sheriff's face. "That's unexpectedly reasonable of you. Don't sound so shocked." Declan watched as the last child entered the schoolhouse. "Sometimes there are better ways to solve problems than violence." "That sounds suspiciously like something Miss Ellison might say," Tate observed with a knowing look. Declan didn't respond, but he couldn't deny the influence of her words on his thinking. As the school bell rang and Olivia closed the door, he turned his horse and headed back to the ranch, carrying the image of her gentle smile with him. Over the next several weeks, Centralia witnessed a subtle change in Declan Quinn. He still carried his gun, still commanded respect bordering on fear, but the explosive anger seemed tempered. When a drunk cowboy bumped into him outside the saloon, Declan merely steadied the man rather than throwing him into the street. When a card game went sour, he walked away instead of escalating the confrontation. His visits to town became more frequent, often coinciding with the end of the school day. He never approached the schoolhouse directly, but would position himself where he could observe from a distance. Occasionally, Olivia would acknowledge him with a nod, but otherwise gave no indication that she noticed his presence. It was Bailey who finally called him out on it. "Boss, either ask the woman to dinner or stop lurking around town like some lovesick boy." Declan glared at him. "Watch yourself, Bailey. Just saying what everyone's thinking." Bailey continued brushing down his horse. "Miss Ellison's a fine woman, proper. Education. If you're interested, you should court her properly." The idea of courting anyone was foreign to Declan. His interactions with women had always been straightforward and temporary arrangements of convenience, rather than affection. The thought of pursuing Olivia in a traditional way made him uncomfortably aware of the vast differences between them. Nevertheless, the next day found him at the general store, awkwardly selecting a book of poetry he thought she might appreciate. The shopkeeper's wife wrapped it carefully, her eyes twinkling with suppressed amusement at the notorious gunslinger purchasing Wordsworth. Declan timed his arrival at the schoolhouse for after the children had left. Olivia was at her desk grading papers when he entered. She looked up, surprise evident on her face. "Mr. Quinn, this is unexpected." He held out the wrapped book. "Thought you might like this." She accepted it cautiously, unwrapping it with careful fingers. When she saw the title, her eyebrows rose. "Wordsworth." The shopkeeper's wife recommended it. He shifted uncomfortably. "If you don't like it, no, it's lovely." She ran her fingers over the embossed cover. "Thank you." "It's very thoughtful." An awkward silence fell between them. Declan cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner, Saturday, at the hotel restaurant." Olivia's expression became guarded. "Mr. Quinn, Declan," he interrupted, "at least when we're not in public." She hesitated, then inclined her head slightly. "Declan, I'm flattered by your invitation, but I must decline." The rejection stung more than he'd anticipated. "May I ask why?" "Several reasons." She closed the book carefully. "First, as the schoolteacher, I must maintain a certain reputation. Dining alone with a man would cause talk. I don't care about talk, but I do." Her voice was firm. "Second, while I appreciate the changes I've observed in your behavior recently, I remain concerned about your reputation for violence." "I haven't drawn my gun in weeks," he protested. "And that's commendable." Her eyes softened slightly. "But changing a lifetime habit requires more than a few weeks of restraint." Declan felt a surge of his old anger. "So I'm good enough to accept gifts from, but not good enough to dine with." She didn't rise to the bait. "That's not what I said. I simply believe that meaningful relationships are built on more than gesture and impulse." "Then how do I prove myself?" The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. Olivia studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps we could start with something less formal. The church is having a picnic this Sunday after services. Many families will be there, if you were to attend." "I don't go to church," he said flatly. "The picnic is open to all." She rose from her desk. "It would be an opportunity to interact in a social setting without the implications of a private dinner." Declan considered this. "You'll be there." "Yes, I help organize the children's games." "Then I'll be there." The decision was impulsive but felt right. Her smile was small but genuine. I look forward to it. As he left the schoolhouse, Declan realized she had once again guided him toward a more measured approach, and he had followed willingly. The awareness should have angered him, but instead, he found himself admiring her quiet wisdom. Sunday's picnic was held in the meadow behind the church. Declan arrived late, deliberately missing the church service but appearing in time for the meal. His presence caused the usual stir, particularly since he seldom participated in community events. Olivia was organizing a sack race for the children when he approached. She wore a simple yellow dress, her hair partially down with a ribbon holding it back from her face. She looked younger, more carefree than he'd seen her before. "Mr. Quinn," she greeted him, mindful of the public setting. "I'm glad you could join us, Miss Ellison." He nodded, acutely aware of the curious stares from nearby parents. "Need any help?" She appeared pleasantly surprised by the offer. "Actually, yes. Could you help line up the children for the race?" For the next hour, Declan found himself assisting with various children's games. Initially awkward with the youngsters, he gradually relaxed as they responded to his direct, no-nonsense instructions. Tommy Bailey, in particular, seemed thrilled to have the legendary rancher helping with the games. Later, as families spread blankets for the meal, Olivia approached him with a plate of food. "The widow Jensen insisted you try her fried chicken," she said, offering the plate. "It's quite famous in the county." They sat on the edge of the gathering, close enough to be part of it but with some privacy for conversation. "The children seem to like you," Olivia observed. "They're not old enough to have heard all the stories yet," Declan replied dryly. "Children are more perceptive than we give them credit for. They respond to how you treat them, not what they've heard." She took a small bite of pie. "You were patient with them today. It's different with kids. They're still learning. And adults aren't." Her question was gentle but pointed. Declan considered this. "Some stop trying, I suppose, and you never thought much about learning anything beyond survival." He met her gaze. "Until recently." Their conversation was interrupted when Sheriff Tate approached, his expression grim. Quinn got a moment. Declan excused himself, following Tate a short distance away. "What is it?" "Just got word from a rider. Watson's men are driving cattle across your creek right now, tearing up the compromise markers you set." The familiar rage rose instantly. "He agreed to those terms. I know. But apparently his eldest son convinced him you were trying to cheat them." Tate watched Declan's reaction carefully. "I'm heading out there now, asking you to let me handle it." Declan's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "This is between Watson and me." "And that's exactly the thinking that leads to bloodshed." Tate's voice hardened. "I'm giving you a chance to do this the right way." Declan glanced back to where Olivia sat, watching their exchange with evident concern. The conflicting impulses within him to protect what was his through force as he always had, or to choose a different path created an almost physical tension. "Fine," he finally growled, "but I'm coming with you." They rode together toward the double queue, gathering Bailey and 2 other hands on the way. As they approached the creek, they could hear the bawling of cattle and shouting men. Watson's crew was indeed driving a herd across the creek at the narrowest point, trampling the markers Declan had carefully placed to designate the shared access area. Watson himself sat on horseback, supervising the operation. His face hardened when he saw Declan riding with the sheriff. "Running to the law now, Quinn," he called mockingly. "Thought you handled your own problems." Declan's jaw clenched, but he let Sheriff Tate speak first. "Watson, you're in violation of an agreed boundary," Tate said firmly. "Pull those cattle back." "Agreement wasn't official," Watson's son Jared cut in. "Nothing signed." A man's word used to mean something, Declan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Watson had the grace to look uncomfortable. Jared thinks the division isn't fair, says you're getting the deeper water. Then he should have said so instead of destroying property markers, Tate replied. This is trespassing, plain and simple. The tension escalated as more of Watson's men gathered, hands hovering near weapons. Bailey and Declan's other hands spread out slightly, preparing for trouble. In the past, Declan would have drawn first, asking questions later. Now, he found himself weighing the consequences not just for himself, but for others. The image of Olivia's disappointed face if he returned to town having shot a man over a water dispute gave him pause. "Watson," Declan called, making a decision. "Your boy's welcome to come measure the depth himself. If the division's unfair, we'll adjust it." Surprise registered on multiple faces, including Tate's. Watson hesitated, clearly unprepared for a reasonable response. "You'd agree to that?" "I said I would, didn't I?" Declan's tone was still hard but controlled. "But you pull those cattle back today and we meet tomorrow with proper surveying tools." The older rancher studied him suspiciously, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He turned to his son. "Jared, get the herd back across." As Watson's men began redirecting the cattle, Sheriff Tate gave Declan an appraising look. "That was unexpected." "Don't get used to it," Declan muttered, though without real heat. Bailey rode closer. "Boss, that was some mighty fine diplomacy." Declan shot him a warning glance. "It was practical. A gunfight would have cost us cattle and maybe men." But they all knew it was more than that. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Declan Quinn had chosen words over weapons when his pride was challenged, and it felt strangely like victory rather than surrender. When he returned to the picnic, most families were already packing up to head home. Olivia remained, helping collect the remains of the meal. She straightened when she saw him approaching. "Is everything all right?" she asked. The sheriff seemed concerned. "Boundary dispute. It's resolved for now." Declan hesitated, then added, "Without gunplay." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "That's very good to hear." "Don't look so surprised," he said, a hint of his old gruffness returning. "Not surprised, impressed." Her smile was genuine. "It takes more strength to solve problems peacefully than violently, Mr. Quinn." "Declan," he reminded her. She glanced around, noting they were relatively alone. "Declan, would you help me carry these baskets to the church?" As they walked together, Declan felt a strange sense of accomplishment, not from conquering an enemy or winning a fight, but from earning a measure of respect from this quiet, thoughtful woman. "The children enjoyed your help today," she said as they approached the church. Tommy Bailey talked of nothing else. "The boy needs a firmer hand. Bailey's too soft with him, perhaps, or perhaps he needs both guidance and gentleness." She set down her basket at the church steps. "Different circumstances require different approaches, like different people." Declan asked, studying her face. "Yes," she met his gaze steadily. "We all respond to different methods of persuasion." "And what persuades you, Olivia?" Her name on his lips seemed to surprise her. After a moment's hesitation, she replied, "Honesty, consistency, actions that match words." "Simple things, but not easy. The most worthwhile things rarely are." She gathered her shawl around her shoulders. "Thank you for coming today. It meant a lot to the children. And to me." As she turned to go, Declan called after her, "Would you reconsider having dinner with me?" "Maybe next Saturday." Olivia paused, then looked back at him. "Perhaps. Let's see how the week unfolds." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. For Declan Quinn, accustomed to immediate results, whether compliance or defiance, her measured response was both frustrating and intriguing. She continued to challenge him simply by refusing to give him the reactions he expected. Over the next week, Declan made a point of being visible in town, always behaving with a restraint that was still new to him. When a cowboy from a passing cattle drive made lewd comments about the saloon girls, Declan intervened not with his fists as he once would have, but with a quiet warning that proved equally effective. When a dispute arose over a business deal at the general store, he offered a fair compromise rather than taking sides. Each time, he was conscious of how news traveled in a small town, and how his actions might be reported to Olivia. The water dispute with Watson was resolved amicably, with Jared Watson grudgingly admitting that the original division had been fair. Sheriff Tate made a point of publicly commending both ranchers for their reasonable approach, further cementing Declan's evolving reputation. By Friday, Declan had begun to worry that Olivia might still refuse his dinner invitation. He decided a more tangible demonstration of his changing ways might be needed. The schoolhouse roof had been leaking during recent rains. Without discussing it with anyone, Declan arrived early Saturday morning with lumber tools and two of his best hands. By the time Olivia arrived to prepare Monday's lessons, they had replaced the damaged section of roof and were cleaning up. She stood watching them for a moment before approaching. "This is unexpected." Declan climbed down from the ladder, figured it needed doing before the next storm. The town council said repairs would have to wait until next month's budget meeting. She ran a hand over the new lumber. "This must have been expensive," he shrugged. "The double Q can afford it. Thank you." Her genuine gratitude was evident in her voice. "The children will be much more comfortable now." "About dinner tonight," Declan began, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I thought maybe instead of the hotel restaurant, you might prefer something less public. Bailey's wife is a good cook. She could prepare something at the ranch." Olivia's expression grew cautious. "While I appreciate the thought, visiting your ranch alone would be even more inappropriate than dining at the hotel." Declan hadn't considered this perspective. "Right, of course." Seeing his disappointment, Olivia suggested, "Perhaps a compromise. There's a lovely spot by the river about a mile outside town. We could have a picnic there tomorrow after church. Still outdoors, still daylight, but with some privacy for conversation." "A picnic," Declan repeated, as if testing the concept. It was so ordinary, so innocent, nothing like the pursuits that had defined his life for so long. "I'd like that." Her smile brightened her entire face. "Wonderful. I'll bring the food if you'll provide the transportation." As Declan rode home, he found himself looking forward to a simple picnic more eagerly than he'd anticipated any event in recent memory. The realization both unsettled and pleased him. Another contradiction in the growing list of changes Olivia Ellison had inspired in his life. Sunday dawned clear and mild. Declan surprised his ranch hands by not only attending church services for the first time in years, but wearing his best clothes and sitting attentively through the sermon. Afterward, he met Olivia as arranged, helping her into his buggy with a basket of food she'd prepared. The spot she'd suggested was indeed perfect, a grassy area beneath cottonwood trees, with the river flowing peacefully nearby. As they spread a blanket and arranged the meal, Declan found himself relaxing in her presence in a way he rarely did with anyone. "Have you always been a rancher?" Olivia asked as they ate. Declan hesitated, then decided on honesty. "No, ran with a rough crowd after the war. Did things I'm not proud of. Hired gun, mostly." She absorbed this without visible judgment. "And the ranch, won it in a poker game 7 years ago. Previous owner was in over his head with debts. Decided to try something legitimate for a change. That must have been a significant transition. Was either that or end up shot in some back alley." He studied her face for signs of disgust or fear, but found only attentive interest. "Your turn. Always been a teacher, since I was 20, yes." She smoothed the blanket absently. "My parents wanted me to marry young, but I was determined to have some independence first. Teaching provided that opportunity. Never married then." "No." She looked toward the river. "There was someone once, a fellow teacher in Minnesota. He died of typhoid fever before we could wed." "I'm sorry," Declan said, genuinely meaning it. She nodded acknowledgement. "It was 4 years ago. Life continues as it must." They talked for hours, the conversation flowing more easily than either had expected. Olivia spoke of her passion for education, her belief that knowledge could transform lives. Declan shared stories of building the double Q from a struggling operation into a profitable ranch, the satisfaction of creating something lasting. As the afternoon waned, they walked along the riverbank. Olivia stooped to pick a wildflower, tucking it behind her ear. "You know, when I first saw you in town that day," Declan said, "standing there watching while everyone else scattered, I couldn't figure out why you didn't run." "I was curious," she admitted. "Everyone spoke of the fearsome Declan Quinn, but all I saw was a man using anger to keep people at a distance." "That obvious, was it? To someone who spent years observing how people protect themselves?" "Yes." She looked up at him. "The truly dangerous ones don't need to prove themselves constantly." Declan considered this. "And now, still think I'm just putting on a show?" "No." Her answer came without hesitation. "I think you're discovering there are better ways to interact with the world than through anger and intimidation, and I think it suits you." The simplicity of her assessment touched something deep within him. On impulse, he reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. Instead, she allowed him to take it, her smaller hand fitting naturally in his. They walked in comfortable silence for a while before returning to the buggy. As they drove back toward town, Declan found himself wishing the day didn't have to end. "I've enjoyed this," Olivia said as they approached Centralia, "more than I expected to." "High praise," he replied dryly but with humor. She laughed, a sound he hadn't heard often enough. "I meant that as a compliment." "I know." He guided the horses carefully. "I'd like to do it again." "I'd like that too." Her response, direct and honest, filled him with unexpected happiness. At her boarding house, he helped her down from the buggy, conscious of curious eyes watching from nearby windows. Standing close to her, he was struck again by the quiet strength she possessed, so different from his own forceful approach to life. "Thank you for today," he said softly. "Thank you for the conversation." She smiled up at him. "And for listening more than talking." "Something else you've taught me." He hesitated, then asked, "May I call on you properly? Regular visits, not just chance encounters." The question held more significance than its simple words suggested. It was Declan Quinn, notorious gunslinger, asking permission to court a respectable woman, acknowledging her standards and boundaries rather than imposing his will. Olivia's expression softened. "Yes, Declan. I'd welcome that." The weeks that followed brought a transformation that amazed the residents of Centralia. Declan Quinn, once feared for his hair-trigger temper, became a regular attendee at church services. He joined town council meetings, offering sensible suggestions for community improvements. When the bank foreclosed on a widow's property, he quietly arranged to purchase it and rent it back to her at an affordable price. His courtship of Olivia Ellison progressed with similar restraint. They were seen walking together after school, Declan carrying her books. He attended school functions, initially causing parents to whisper nervously, but gradually becoming an accepted presence. On several occasions, he even spoke to the older students about ranching and business management. revealing an astute mind that had previously been overshadowed by his reputation for violence. Not everyone approved of the relationship. Some parents worried about the schoolteacher associating with a man of Declan's background. Others, particularly single women who had set their sights on the wealthy rancher, spread malicious rumors about Olivia's motives. Through it all, Olivia maintained her quiet dignity, neither defending nor explaining her choice to anyone. Her silence in the face of gossip impressed Declan more than any verbal defense could have. "Doesn't it bother you, what they're saying?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch of her boarding house. "Words only have the power we give them," she replied. "Those who matter know the truth. If anyone said those things to your face, you do what?" She looked at him pointedly. "Revert to threatening violence," Declan sighed. "Old habits, new habits form with practice." She placed her hand over his. "You've come so far already. I'm proud of you." Her approval meant more to him than he could express. For a man who had spent most of his life intimidating others into respect, earning genuine admiration through character rather than fear was a profound shift. As summer turned to autumn, their relationship deepened. Declan found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he'd never articulated to anyone about his troubled childhood, his experiences in the war, his regrets over past actions. Olivia listened without judgment, offering perspective rather than criticism. In turn, she revealed her own struggles, the poverty she'd grown up in, her determination to create a different life through education, her fears that she might never have a family of her own after losing her fiancé. "I've always wanted children," she admitted one crisp October evening as they watched the sunset from a hilltop outside town. "Teaching fills part of that need, but it's not the same as having your own." Declan, who had never considered fatherhood, found himself imagining a future with Olivia and children of their own. The vision was startlingly appealing. "You'd be a wonderful mother," he said, his voice rougher than usual with emotion. She turned to look at him, something vulnerable in her expression. "Do you really think so?" "I know so." He took her hand, entwining their fingers. "You have more patience and wisdom than anyone I've ever known." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Declan leaned closer. Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound. When they finally separated, Olivia's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "That was worth waiting for," she whispered. Declan laughed softly. "I've been wanting to do that for months." "I know." Her smile held a hint of mischief. "Sometimes anticipation makes the reward sweeter." "Another lesson in patience from Miss Ellison," he teased. "One you've learned remarkably well." She touched his face, her expression growing serious. "You're not the same man who nearly shot someone over watered whiskey." "No," he agreed. "I'm not, thanks to you, not because of me, because you were willing to change." She leaned her head against his shoulder as they watched the last colors fade from the sky. "That takes more courage than drawing a gun ever could." As they rode back to town in the gathering darkness, Declan knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to spend his life with this extraordinary woman. The realization brought not fear or doubt, but a sense of rightness that settled deep in his soul. The opportunity to propose came unexpectedly the following week. A severe autumn storm had damaged several buildings in town, including the schoolhouse. Classes were temporarily moved to the church while repairs were arranged. Declan, now serving on the town council, was instrumental in organizing the restoration efforts. After a long day overseeing workers, he found Olivia in the empty church, arranging her teaching materials for the next day. Lamplight cast a warm glow over her features as she worked, unaware of his presence. "Working late?" he asked from the doorway. She looked up with a smile. "Trying to maintain some sense of order amidst the chaos. The children are struggling with the disruption to their routine. It won't be for much longer. The roof should be finished by week's end. Thanks in large part to your efforts." She set down the books she was organizing. "The town is fortunate to have you on the council. Never thought I'd be involved in community matters." Declan moved further into the room. "Never thought a lot of things that seem natural now." Olivia studied his face. "You've adapted remarkably well to civic responsibility. Had a good teacher." He reached for her hand. "One who showed me the value of thinking before acting. You give me too much credit, not nearly enough." Drawing a deep breath, Declan continued, "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about the future, about what I want." Something in his tone made Olivia go very still. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That I love you." The words, never before spoken to any woman, felt right. "That I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Emotion filled her eyes. "Declan." He knelt before her, still holding her hand. "Olivia Ellison, I know I'm not what your parents probably hoped for. I've got a past that can't be erased. But I promise you this. Every day for the rest of my life I'll strive to be worthy of your love. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled onto her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy that swept through Declan was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. As he rose to embrace her, he silently thanked whatever fate had placed this woman in his path, this extraordinary woman whose silence had taught him more than a lifetime of shouted warnings and threats. Their wedding took place in December, with the church decorated for Christmas. It seemed the entire town attended, eager to witness the union of the reformed gunslinger and the beloved schoolteacher. Even Frank Watson and his family came, their water dispute long resolved through the compromise Declan had proposed. Sheriff Tate served as best man, a role that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Bailey's son Tommy proudly carried the rings, while the mayor's wife stood as Olivia's matron of honor. As they exchanged vows, Declan looked into Olivia's eyes and saw his future reflected there, a future of peace, purpose, and love that he'd never dared to imagine for himself. Her quiet strength had calmed his tempestuous nature, teaching him that true power lay not in a quick draw, but in the ability to pause and choose a better way. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Declan kissed his bride with a tenderness that moved many witnesses to tears. The notorious gunman who had once terrorized the territory with his rage had found salvation in the arms of a woman whose greatest weapon had been her silence. Spring brought new beginnings to the Double Q Ranch. Declan built an extension to the ranch house, creating a proper schoolroom where Olivia could teach the children of ranch workers and neighboring properties. Though she continued teaching in town 3 days a week, this arrangement allowed her to reach children too far from Centralia to attend regular school. Their home quickly became a gathering place for the community. Sunday dinners at the Quinn Ranch became a tradition, with Bailey's family, Sheriff Tate, and various townspeople regularly attending. Declan, once a solitary figure feared by all, found unexpected satisfaction in hospitality. "Did you ever imagine your life would look like this?" Olivia asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset over their land. "Not in my wildest dreams," Declan admitted, his arm around her shoulders. "I figured I'd die young with a bullet in my back. And now," he smiled, kissing her temple, "now I plan to live a very long time, growing old alongside you, watching our children grow up." "Children!" She turned to face him, hope brightening her features. Declan placed his hand gently on her abdomen. "Unless I'm mistaken about why you've been feeling unwell in the mornings." Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" Bailey's wife mentioned the signs. He searched her face anxiously. "Am I right?" Olivia nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. "I was waiting to be certain before telling you. I didn't want to disappoint you if I was wrong. You could never disappoint me." He gathered her close. "Nothing in this world could make me happier." As they sat together planning their future, Declan marveled at how completely his life had changed in just over a year. The man who had once been defined by his quickness to anger now found his greatest strength in patience and thoughtfulness. All because a quiet woman had stood firm in the face of his rage, offering not confrontation but silent challenge, teaching him through her example that the most powerful response is often no response at all. Their son, Daniel, was born the following autumn, a robust, healthy boy with his mother's amber eyes and his father's strong features. Declan, who had once handled guns with confident ease, approached his infant son with reverent caution, awed by the tiny life they had created. "He's perfect," he whispered, cradling the newborn while Olivia rested. "Absolutely perfect." As years passed, the legend of Declan Quinn transformed in the telling. While older residents remembered the dangerous gunslinger, younger generations knew him as a respected rancher, loving husband, and dedicated father. His temper, once his defining characteristic, became merely a footnote to a life characterized by integrity and compassion. The Double Q prospered under his careful management, expanding to become one of the largest operations in the territory. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, Declan was among those invited to the capital for the celebration and honor that reflected his standing in the community. Olivia's educational initiatives expanded beyond their local area, eventually gaining recognition throughout the state. Her methods for teaching children in remote rural areas became a model adopted by other territories. Through it all, she maintained the quiet dignity and thoughtful approach that had first caught Declan's attention. Their family grew with the addition of twin daughters, Emma and Rose, 3 years after Daniel's birth. Watching Declan with his children patient, gentle, yet firm when needed, Olivia often reflected on the remarkable transformation of the man she had married. "What are you thinking about?" Declan asked one evening, finding her watching him as he told bedtime stories to their children. "About the man I met that day in Centralia," she replied. "The one who nearly shot someone over whiskey," he grimaced. "Not my finest moment, on the contrary," she smiled. "It was the beginning of everything important." "How do you figure that?" "Because that's when I saw what no one else seemed to, that your anger was a shield, not your true nature." She took his hand. The real Declan Quinn was always in there, waiting for someone to listen to his silence. He brought her hand to his lips. "You're the only one who ever tried. And look what I found." Her eyes shone with love. "A man worth waiting for." As they gathered their sleepy children and prepared for their own rest, Declan reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment of profound contentment. The path from feared gunslinger to respected family man had not always been easy, but every step had been worthwhile. In the years that followed, whenever his temper threatened to flare, Declan would remember the lesson Olivia had taught him that first day, that true strength lay not in reaction, but in reflection. The cowboy who had once been quick to anger had learned, through a woman's silence, to think first. And in that pause, that moment of consideration before action, he had discovered not weakness, but a power greater than any he had known before, the power of choice, of wisdom, and of love.